America has always feared the unification of black people.
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips?
J. Edgar Hoover, the first director of the FBI, famously expressed deep concern about the rise of a black messiah. This term was used by Hoover to describe a charismatic black leader who could unite and inspire African Americans in a way that might challenge the status quo and threaten the existing social order.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind.
And for centuries, any hint of a black messiah has been cut at the root. However, some voices and figures still manage to make lasting impacts and strike mighty blows against America's racist agendas. In no particular order, here is a list of 10 of the most feared black Americans. Hoover's famous COINTELPRO initiative outlined specifically strategic tactics to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Tactics such as surveillance, infiltration, harassment, propaganda, discredit, divide, and neutralize have all been used to thwart any one unifying force. But none of these tactics have stopped the first person on our list. 10. Louis Farrakhan. Coming out of the civil rights era of the 60s, Black America had lost some of its most prominent figures, Malcolm X and Dr. King. But right over the horizon rose a new voice out of the Nation of Islam, a leader who had been a guiding force for over 50 years and a perceived threat for equally as long. The Honorable Louis Farrakhan had been a powerful advocate for black self-reliance, economic independence, and solidarity among the black community. A disciple of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Minister Farrakhan is arguably one of the greatest orators of modern times. They say the tongue is mightier than the sword, and Minister Farrakhan has been in America's crosshairs for wielding his weapon of choice.
We didn't come to Washington to petition the government for a way out of her, but to find a way out of our affliction, but a way out from something bigger than our affliction.
Once heralded as the next Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan has garnered his own following and laid down his own legacy of black empowerment. His ability to mobilize the masses of black folk has continuously earned him a title of one of the most feared black Americans. Farrakhan's speeches often blend religious doctrine with a keen understanding of social issues, making him a compelling figure for many who feel disenfranchised by America. His ability to communicate complex ideas in a relatable manner has garnered him a large and devoted following. This power was put on full display when he was able to spearhead the Million Man March in 1995. The Million Man March. On October 16, 1995, an estimated 1 million African Americans descended on the nation's capital. It was a landmark event in American history that had a profound impact on both the African American community and the broader national dialogue on race and social justice. Organized by Minister Farakhan, along with the Nation of Islam, provided a powerful platform for addressing issues such as economic inequality, family instability, and racial injustice. Of course, anything that resembles a massive united front in the black community would draw criticism. Critics question the motives and ideology of Farakhan. Nonetheless, the Million Man March was an example of the power of Minister Farakhan's ability to get millions on the path to unification. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is seen as a threat to the social order of America because of his criticism of systemic racism and white supremacy tactics used throughout the government, law enforcement, and other power structures. The Nation of Islam's leader's ability to mobilize nationally and globally makes him one of the most feared black men in America's history. Next on our list was the youngest ever to be labeled a black messiah. 9. Fred Hampton. What were you doing at 21 years old? Well, Fred Hampton was a revolutionary.
We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.
Fred Hampton was the charismatic leader and chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Known as Chairman Fred, he played a critical role in the unification and mobilization of which he referred to as the Rainbow Coalition. The coalition included the Puerto Rican nationalist group, the Young Lords, and the organization of poor whites called the Young Patriots. The Black Panther Party was already deemed a threat by America's mainstream, considered a black nationalist movement that promoted violent tactics. But on the contrary, the Black Panthers only believed in self-sufficiency, black love, and self-defense. As a member of the Black Panther Party, Fred Hampton played a critical role in expanding the party's influence in Chicago and beyond. He was instrumental in organizing programs like the Free Breakfast for Children initiative and health clinics. Chairman Fred's affiliation with the Black Panther Party, along with his ability to galvanize the working class and poor across races, put him on J. Edgar Hoover's hit list. The FBI director deemed him a potential black messiah. COINTELPRO versus the Black Panthers. COINTELPRO has to be considered one of the most detrimental weapons to ever be used against black Americans. It has successfully dismantled and destroyed many of black Americans' efforts to unite and build self-sufficient communities.
Secret FBI memos made public today show that the late J. Edgar Hoover ordered a nationwide campaign to disrupt the activities of the New Left without telling any of his superiors about it.
One of COINTELPRO's active missions was to destroy the Black Panther Party and to undermine and neutralize Hampton's leadership. On the early morning of December 4th, 1969, a team of Chicago police officers conducted a raid of Fred Hampton's apartment. The raid was part of a broader crackdown on the Black Panthers. According to the official police account, the officers claimed that they were met with gunfire upon entering the apartment, leading to an intense shootout that resulted in the deaths of Fred Hampton and fellow Panther Mark Clark. The police reported that the Panthers had fired at them, and they returned fire in self-defense. However, this official narrative was quickly challenged. Evidence suggested that the police had fired nearly all the shots during the raid. Chairman Fred was found to have been shot multiple times at close range while lying in bed, execution style. Further investigations revealed that the FBI, through COINTELPRO, had been actively involved in monitoring and targeting Hampton, with the raid being part of a broader strategy to neutralize him and the Black Panther Party. 8. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of the most iconic and revered figures in American history, but he was also considered one of the most dangerous men in America at one point, which is very odd for a man who led with nonviolence.
Happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent resistance was the cornerstone of his leadership. He believed that peaceful protest and civil disobedience were the most effective ways to combat racial segregation and injustice. This approach won him widespread respect and contrasted with the violence typically inflicted upon the participants. A common trait among those deemed too powerful among the black community is the ability to convey messages and galvanize the masses. Dr. King was one of the best orators of all time. A well-educated Morehouse graduate, King grew up leading church congregations. This skill set translated well as he led many in the fight against racism and segregation. I've been to the mountaintop. Despite his commitment to nonviolence, King was perceived as a threat by many in the American establishment, including the FBI and other government entities. Dr. King's campaigns for desegregation, voting rights, and economic justice were seen as radical threats to the existing social order, particularly in the South. However, toward the end of his life, Dr. King's activism evolved. He began to speak out against broader issues, including the Vietnam War and social disparities. With Dr. King's ability to galvanize millions in the fight against racial injustices, his evolving thoughts on broader issues, including economic disparities, made him too dangerous. This was evident in the final speech he gave on April 3, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King was speaking in support of the city's sanitation workers, who were striking for better wages and working conditions. He urged the audience to continue supporting its workers and to unify for economic justice. He also prophesied his own death. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated the very next day. It was later discovered that the FBI conducted extensive surveillance on King, tapping his phones, monitoring his activities, and attempting to discredit him through various means, including leaking damaging information to the media. Make sure you stick around to see who else made our list. 7. Malcolm X. Malcolm X is often brought up as a counterpoint to Dr. King. They are often pinned against each other when discussing their philosophies and visions of black people overcoming acts of oppression. Whether you believe that to have been true, they definitely did share one thing in common: the ire of the white power structure. Malcolm X was a fierce advocate for black empowerment and self-determination. He emphasized the importance of black people taking control of their own destinies. Unlike Dr. King and the overwhelming sentiment of the civil rights movement, Minister Malcolm rejected the idea of integration. He instead advocated for his people to be allowed to thrive in peace, and if not, they should be prepared to face their oppressors head-on. The eyes of the world found Malcolm as one of the prominent ministers within the Nation of Islam. Through his fiery rhetoric, backed by his intellect, Minister Malcolm was one of the first vocal advocates for self-defense, which was seen as a direct challenge to the social order at the time. Up to that point, black people were seen as docile, and with he and Dr. King rising to prominence at the same time, his motto of "by any means necessary" was seen as a direct threat and landed him under the watchful eyes of every governmental agency. Another reason Malcolm was determined to be dangerous was that his vision continued to evolve. After his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964 and his break from the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X began to broaden his focus, advocating for global human rights and connecting the struggle of African Americans to liberation movements in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He had plans on leading the plight to the stage of the United Nations, which would have been an act of war against U.S. foreign and domestic policies. Unfortunately, Malcolm never made it to the steps of the UN. He was assassinated on February 21, 1965. There has long been speculation and controversy surrounding the assassination of Malcolm X, including potential connections to governmental agencies such as the FBI and the NYPD. There is documented evidence that Malcolm and his family were under constant surveillance by COINTELPRO and the New York Police Department. In 2021, two men who were wrongfully convicted of Malcolm X's murder, Muhammad Abdul Aziz and Khalil Islam, were exonerated after new evidence emerged, including FBI documents that had been withheld during the original trial. This raised further questions about the government's role in mishandling the investigation and possibly covering up key evidence. Up next, this man has impacted more black men and women than Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan. 6. Elijah Muhammad. Before Louis Farrakhan and before Malcolm, there was their teacher and mentor, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad was the leader of the Nation of Islam from 1934 until his death in 1975. A huge reason why voices that rise out of the Nation of Islam have to be contained by the power structure is because of the force Elijah Muhammad made the nation. Under Elijah Muhammad's leadership, the Nation of Islam grew from a religious sect into a powerful movement that attracted thousands of followers. The NOI offered a message of self-reliance, black empowerment, and racial pride that resonated with many African Americans during a time of pervasive racism and economic hardship. And we know historically that when black people begin to operate with pride and love of self, for some reason, they become a threat. Elijah Muhammad's teachings emphasized the need for black people to separate themselves from white society, which he viewed as inherently corrupt and oppressive. He advocated for the establishment of independent black communities and institutions. He preached a strict code of conduct, emphasizing discipline, cleanliness, and abstinence from alcohol, drugs, and other vices. His teachings offered a sense of purpose and direction, particularly for those who felt marginalized or disillusioned by mainstream society. He emphasized his teachings in best-selling books. Message to the Black Man was released in 1965 and served as a reference guide on how to live a righteous life according to his teachings. He followed that up with How to Eat to Live, which focused on dietary and health guidance and gave people the instructions on how to live healthier within the confinements of America's highly processed foods. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teachings of black separatism were seen as radical and dangerous. Because he didn't push integration, he and the nation were labeled as hostile and violent. On the contrary, he only wanted peace for his people, but just in case, he trained his students in the art of self-defense. However, to find why he was a threat to the white power structure, look no further than his disciples. We know Malcolm X and Minister Farakhan, but they were only two of his students. Under the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, the Nation of Islam has produced thousands of like-minded men and women who still carry on his teachings. People who believe in doing for self and not looking for any handouts. And when you have people who want for nothing, then you can't control them. And if you can't control them, that makes them dangerous. Will any women make our list? Stay tuned to find out. 5. Nat Turner. There aren't many accounts of black people taking revenge against oppression into their own hands. Many have been scrubbed from the history books. However, Nat Turner led a biblical revolt, and his name will never be forgotten. Nat Turner was an enslaved preacher. Turner was a deeply religious man who believed he was chosen by God to lead his people out of bondage. Before he became a revolutionary, Nat Turner went around preaching the word of God, even while he and his were living in hell. Nat's spiritual connections gave him a sense of purpose and mission that resonated with many enslaved Africans. He used his position as a preacher to inspire and mobilize others, framing the rebellion as a divinely ordained act of liberation. This connection between faith and resistance made him a powerful and inspirational figure. From a young age, Turner believed he was destined for a special purpose. He often had vivid religious visions and was seen by others as deeply spiritual. One of his early visions involved him seeing images in the sky, which he interpreted as a sign that he was chosen by God for a great purpose. Turner never wavered on what he believed to be messages from the Almighty himself. That's why, in February 1831, he took a solar eclipse as a sign from God to rebel against the order of things. Several months later, Nat Turner would go on to lead the most storied slave rebellion in American history. Nat Turner, accompanied by about 60 other slaves, began violently fighting their way to freedom. Over the course of 2 days in Southampton County, Virginia, the rebellion left around 60 white men, women, and children dead. The rebellion was quickly squashed by local reinforcements and resulted in the deaths of innocent black men, women, and children as revenge. Although Turner was eventually caught and executed, his willingness to use violence against violence was an act that could never be duplicated. Over the next months, the power structure of chattel slavery made sure to quell any hints of the next Nat Turner. And for years, his tale of vengeance was suppressed or framed as a cautionary tale. 4. Harriet Tubman. Often referred to as the Moses of her people, Harriet Tubman is one of the most revered figures in African American history, and if she was around when J. Edgar Hoover was around, she would have definitely fit the description of a black messiah. She, like Nat Turner, took direct action against the violence of slavery, but instead of meeting it with violence, she instead decided to escape it altogether and take as many people with her as possible. Over the course of a decade, Harriet Tubman used a lesser-known network of routes to free dozens of slaves. The Underground Railroad was a secret network of routes, safe houses, and individuals who helped enslaved African Americans escape from the bondage in the southern United States to freedom in the North, Canada, Mexico, and other safe territories in the 19th century, especially in the years leading up to the Civil War. By way of the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman made 13 missions to the South, leading around 70 enslaved people, including family members, to freedom. Along her travels, she made alliances with Frederick Douglass and John Brown. Her ability to help slaves escape was not taken lightly. Slaves were paid for property. Escaped slaves meant money lost. This made Harriet one of the most wanted people in America at that time. But did you know she also served in the Civil War? During the Civil War, Tubman served as a scout, spy, nurse, and cook for the Union Army. She was the first woman to lead an armed expedition during the war, guiding the Combahee River Raid, which resulted in the liberation of more than 700 enslaved people in South Carolina. Her contributions to the war effort further solidified her status as a hero and a powerful figure in the fight for freedom. Tubman's activities on the Underground Railroad directly challenged the institution of slavery by helping enslaved people escape to freedom. Despite the high bounties placed on her head, Tubman was never captured. Her ability to evade capture and continue her work made her a figure of fear and hatred among slave owners. But then, to turn around and become a valuable member during the Civil War, how could oppressors not fear her? We are down to 3, but we are sure there's more. Comment who you think should make our next list. 3. Marcus Garvey. Throughout the years, even before emancipation, black people understood that building their own economy was the only way to thrive in America. No one understood this concept more than Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was one of the most influential black leaders of the early 20th century, known for his powerful voice advocating for black pride, self-reliance, and his entrepreneurial spirit. Through the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Garvey promoted black nationalism, economic independence, and advocated for African Americans to return to Africa. To this day, the UNIA represents the largest mass movement of black people in American history. Through Pan-Africanism, Garvey imagined a prosperous diaspora of black folk all around the world, united and economically free. To get things started, Marcus Garvey founded the Negro Factories Corporation to promote black-owned businesses. His factories at the time were some of the largest in America. His biggest swing at independence was his attempt to control not only the trade between Africans and African Americans, but the transport. The Black Star Line. In 1919, Garvey founded the Black Star Line, a shipping company designed to be a symbol of black pride and a tool for economic empowerment. The name Black Star Line was a deliberate counter to the White Star Line, a British shipping company. Garvey's idea was to create a fleet of ships owned and operated by black people, which could facilitate trade between Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, and even transport African Americans back to Africa if they chose to return. The Black Star Line quickly captured the imagination of millions of black people across the world. Garvey and the UNIA raised funds by selling shares of the company to ordinary black citizens, allowing them to invest in what Garvey described as a venture for the betterment of the entire race. Not only did Garvey create an economic opportunity for himself, but he gave black Americans a chance to gain wealth as well. And as we've seen, an economic policy that involves black people gaining financial independence en masse must be destroyed. The scale and success of Garvey's movement alarmed many in the American establishment. The UNIA's mass rallies, parades, and meetings drew tens of thousands of black people, fostering a sense of unity and empowerment that was seen as dangerous by those in power. Marcus Garvey's success attracted the attention of, guess who? J. Edgar Hoover. The government's efforts to undermine Garvey included surveillance, infiltration of the UNIA, and legal persecution. So in 1963, Garvey was convicted of mail fraud in connection with the Black Star Line, a charge widely believed to have been politically motivated. He was imprisoned and later deported to Jamaica, effectively ending his influence in the United States. Garvey is not as widely discussed in traditional education as he should be, and there is a good reason why. His story and tenets have already inspired numerous leaders and movements, including the Rastafari movement in Jamaica, the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, and Malcolm X. Imagine if Marcus Garvey was emphasized in curriculum across the country. Sounds dangerous, right? 2. Kwame Ture. You ever wonder where the slogan Black Power came from? Look no further than Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. Kwame Ture was a well-rounded enemy of the state and advocate of the people. He started his journey on the grounds of Howard University, often referred to as the Mecca of black education. Howard University was a crucial environment for Ture's intellectual and political development. It exposed him to a wide range of ideas, from traditional civil rights strategies to more radical and militant approaches. While at Howard, Kwame became deeply involved in the civil rights movement. He joined the Nonviolent Action Group, which played a significant role in shaping his activism. During his time at Howard, Kwame Ture participated in the Freedom Rides, a series of integrated bus trips to the South aimed at challenging segregation in interstate travel. His involvement in the Freedom Rides and the subsequent arrests highlighted his commitment to the movement and solidified his reputation as a determined activist. Through his time at Howard and his involvement in the civil rights movement, Ture was able to work alongside Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and John Lewis. Because of his youth, Ture saw merit in the nonviolent ways of Dr. King and by the any means necessary approach of Malcolm, and through his own fiery speeches and charismatic leadership, Kwame Ture inspired a new generation of activists. It was his willingness to learn and combine his education that made him dangerous. But he became a true enemy of the state when he formed an alliance with the Black Panthers. Kwame was already championing the need for black self-determination and resistance against systemic oppression. But once he teamed up with brothers and sisters who were about that life, boy did he become a real threat to the social order. The Black Panthers' open advocacy for armed self-defense and their confrontational stance toward law enforcement made them targets for government surveillance and repression. Ture's support for these groups only heightened the sense of threat he posed to the American establishment. Ture's vision extended beyond the U.S., linking the struggle for black liberation and anti-colonial movements worldwide. Ture's shift towards internationalism, particularly his alignment with socialist and pan-African ideologies, positioned him against Western capitalist interests. His travels and alliances with socialist leaders in Africa, as well as his support for global revolutionary movements, were seen as subversive by those in power. When Kwame Ture said Black Power, he meant all black people around the world. 1. Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party. There was no group more feared by the white power structure of America than the Black Panther Party, which meant there was no greater threat to that power than its co-founder and leader, Huey P. Newton. Along with Bobby Seale, Newton co-founded the Black Panther Party in 1966. The party's mission to combat police brutality and advocate for black empowerment resonated deeply within the black community, providing a sense of agency and pride. It also meant they became another target of the FBI and other enforcement agents of the state. Under Newton's leadership, the Black Panther Party established a range of community programs, including free breakfast programs for children, health clinics, and educational initiatives. Imagine the power of a child who doesn't have to worry about where their first meal is going to come from. A parent who doesn't have to worry about affording health care. We think the first attribute of any black messiah has to be his ability to captivate audiences with his oratory skills. Huey Newton had that too. He was smooth and articulate, but had the native tongue of every brother of that time. His intellectual rigor and charisma made him a powerful spokesperson for the Black Power movement. The Panther Party's advocacy for armed self-defense and its confrontational approach toward law enforcement were seen as direct threats to the established order. Seeing well-dressed, clean black men and women with their afros pointing toward heaven, holding shotguns and handguns struck fear into the mainstream. They didn't use their weapons for violence, but for patrolling their own neighborhoods and monitoring the activities of police within them. In 1967, Newton was involved in a shootout with Oakland police, resulting in the death of Officer John Frey and Newton's imprisonment for manslaughter. His imprisonment became a rallying point for the BPP, leading to the Free Huey movement. He was released in 1970 after his conviction was overturned, but the legal battles and time in prison took a toll on him and the party. Huey P. Newton didn't believe in capitalism. His association with Marxist and socialist ideologies, as well as their revolutionary rhetoric, were perceived as subversive. Oh, the government can't have anyone giving out free food, free health care, and peacefully patrolling their own neighborhoods. So you know what happened next. COINTELPRO eventually set out to infiltrate, subvert, and destroy, and they went straight for the head of Huey P. Newton. The Black Panther Party was hit with extensive surveillance, infiltration, and attempts to undermine the organization. Soon, constant infighting began. Drug use and domestic violence began to seep through the party. Newton's visibility and leadership made him a particular focus of these efforts. Over the following years, the Black Panther Party became a shell of itself, and in 1989, Huey P. Newton died in a drug-related murder.